Mark Rainey, so good to see you. Welcome back to the program. Happy New Year. Hope your family's well. Congrats on the new book. I'm just laying it right out there for you.
Thanks for everything, Paul. Glad to be back. Everybody's good.
Good, good. I'm so glad to hear that. I always love this time of year. I love to read the new Gray Man books, and thank you very much for sharing Midnight Black with me. I'm interested in talking to you about that. And as they say, Mark, timing is everything. And I saw in the newspaper today that the administration announced the release of a U.S. prisoner from a Russian prison, I think in Rybinsk, Russia. And of course, Midnight Black takes us on this incredible journey. The readers are just thrown into this brutal reality, really, of Russian prisons, particularly the notorious, I want to get this right, Mordovian prison. It's a female prison colony. Your timing is just impeccable. You must have an inside track to the administration because all this is coming together so well. But tell us how you did the research because I looked up the Rybinsk prison. I could not find much at all. So my hat's off to you always.
Yeah, I can't remember the number. I want to say there's something like 718 federal prisons inside of Russia, all over the place. So every state has them. Excuse me. The female penal colonies, the male penal colonies. There's different types of regime. There's a different types of the way they're organized and structured. But the research I did basically was look at everything I could find online about. I've been to Russia, but I haven't been to a prison there. Um,
Good. Good to hear.
everything that I've seen online, that took weeks to find every tiny little piece of video or thing I could read about it, and then I would read older books, Gulag Archipelago, books about the Gulag system, because even though they don't officially call them gulags anymore, the Gulag was a system of prisons created by Stalin in the 1930s. The buildings themselves of a lot of these prisons, including the one in the book, were built as gulags in the 1930s mostly. And they just put these prisons all over Russia, and these buildings are almost 100 years old in these almost small little towns. And there's hard labor, and they're miserable. And I've read the accounts of people that have been imprisoned and Americans that had been imprisoned. So there was a lot to research, but you had to dig pretty deep.
Yeah. Yeah, well, again, congrats on everything. The book is just excellent. One of my
Thanks.
favorite characters, Zoya Zakharova, makes a very prominent appearance early on in the book. Well, no, um, not gonna tell any secrets here about your wonderful story, but it was interesting because you're known for action, and the prison scenes really kind of slowed things down dramatically. It was very powerful. And how did you balance that with this kind of always relentless pursuit of action with this very necessary kind of, almost a life of really this was going to be kind of her end of days, and she kind of knew it, and but yet it really was a very powerful kind of pacing, I thought, in the book.
Thank you. Yeah, I like the juxtapositioning of action and then everything grinds to a halt. For me, my credo is I have to have tension on every page. So
Yeah.
even though there's not action in necessarily in a labor camp, she's working as a seamstress 16 hours a day. Not a lot of action to that. There's definitely a lot of tension in that,
Yeah.
and that's what I was trying to convey there. And I think you want to build it for the reader, and you want to get in the reader you want the reader to get in your character's brain. And there's nothing bleaker than the existence that she was under there at the beginning of the book. And I needed for the reader to feel that and really see what the stakes are in the story.
You really feel it. I certainly did too. I also really felt the tension and the power that Court was going. Cortland Gentry, of course, the Gray Man, the really the primary character in your books. He really is going through it. He's pretty worn out, pretty bad shape at moments, but yet he keeps going. What is it about the tension that just drives him too? Because that I thought was very special.
Thank you. I think of all the skills that I've given Court over a 14 book series,
Yeah,
the last skill that I have him working on is his skill in trusting others and finding love and things of that nature. And that depth of that aspect of his character has been sort of the last one to come along here. And I've done that in the past few books, and I really wanted to show how much he loves Zoya and how desperate he is. Without giving away too much of the story, I can tell you about how it opens. I mean, he
yeah,
believes that she's still alive. Everyone in the West who he sort of halfway trusts assumes that she's been executed in Moscow. She's been taken back to Russia. It's a standalone novel. You don't have to have read any of the other books, but it establishes right at the beginning of the book that this woman has been taken into Moscow. Most people think she's dead, but he just can't let himself believe that. So he's desperate. He's tried the easy ways to get into Russia to go find her. Not that they're really that easy, but now he's scraping the bottom of the barrel and trying to work with the Romanian mob to get put on a smuggling ship across the Black Sea into Sochi. And I just wanted to paint this picture of him on page one as a completely desperate person willing to do anything and taking some really high risks to do that. And I just wanted to sort of contrast what Zoya is going through in the prison with this just every day exactly the same with Court, who is just this wild man trying to get to her.
as I mentioned earlier, you really are known for your research into prisons, into guns and shooting. You and I have talked about this previously. I wonder if was there anything specific that you had to research in the way of weaponry and guns for Midnight Black? Because it really, again, I love those parts where you're just really explaining the very fine details of these munitions and armaments and special rifles. It's really fascinating stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, I've done a lot of training with the weapons. I own many of the weapons that are used, the small arms, obviously, that are used in these books. But for really the last act of this story, even though it's a story about individuals, Court and Zoya is not just this prisoner waiting to be freed. She has a lot of agency in her own survival and other things that are bigger picture things going on inside of Russia. So she's a very important character. Even though it's about these characters and not about big geopolitical things, big geopolitical things are happening. And really, the last act of the novel is a large military engagement, a big rescue mission involving different military forces, different types of aircraft. And so I had to do all this research on what's going on in the war with Russia and Ukraine. I wanted to be as current as I could. I started this book, over a year ago. So, you always try to figure out where things are going to be in February of the following year when the book comes out. So I was looking at drone technology and, the missile defense, all these sorts of things that are going on in Russia and how Russia structures its missile defense, what airfields are in range of which particular type of weapon, down to the nitty gritty. I wanted to create this battle that the hero and heroine and some of the other key characters find themselves swept up in the as tiny little cogs in the middle of. I wanted to create this big battle strategically and tactically, and do that from both sides, from the Russian side and from the uh, the Western forces side, and that was fun. That was a lot of work, and it's interesting. I remember I can't remember the number, but the number of drones and missiles that I used in this engagement. Someone in the book says something about how like it's never been done before that number, and now that's happening quite a bit. Those numbers aren't as crazy as they were when I wrote them, thankfully, or sadly, I guess I should say, because it's war. But at the same time, you want to try and portray things as accurately as possible.
New York Times author, best-selling writer Mark Graney is our guest today, author of the wonderful new book titled Midnight Black. We've talked to Mark previously. This one is a winner, Mark. I just really loved it. I'm not the only one of really renown. Brad Thor says that um, the Gray Man novels blow all the others away. I thought that was really wonderful. Congrats on the book. Congrats on all the work and all the great reviews.
Thank you.
I just think this is going to be another winner for you, and I just want to make sure that my audience knows pick this one up. It's coming out on the 18th, I believe, of February. So just a couple more days. We'll have links so that our audience can find out more about the book, more about Mark, where to get the book, and all of this great stuff that Mark tells us about. One of the interesting things I always pick up on Mark, these subtle little things that you add to the book, and you dedicate this particular book to. I want to make sure and get the name pronounced correctly. Anna Politkovskaya, I believe, is her name.
Hmm.
Alexei Navalny is also one of the dedicatees, but Anna is a Russian journalist, and she was assassinated for exposing corruption within Russia. I wonder why it was important to honor her. Because your ideals connect very much with all of this, but I thought that was a very nice touch.
Thank you. As I was doing the research on the novel and reading about the police state that Russia has become, I wanted to make this novel feel like one of those Cold War novels that I grew up reading, Tom Clancy or Frederick Forsyth or Nelson DeMille or Jean Le Carré or any one of many, many other people, because that's sort of the world that we're in right now, unfortunately, regarding Russia. They don't have the empire that they used to have, as far as having all the satellites that they did during the Soviet days, but they're working on it. I mean, they're definitely working on reacquiring that to one degree or another. And Anna Politkovskaya and Alexei Navalny are just two people that were just killed for saying the truth in the early days of Putin, or in Navalny's case recently. But Anna died in 2005, I think, and in the early days of Putin, in the 2000s, he was a known quantity for those of us that were really looking at it as this is a very dangerous ex-KGB guy that is, you know, eradicating democracy, et cetera, et cetera. But a lot of people still, supported him or had nice things to say. To this day, a lot of people in government, say he's not that bad or whatever. I think that's ridiculous. So I really kind of wanted to pay homage to these people who gave their lives speaking truth to power because. I mean, my character, the gray man, he has this moral code and he's trying to do the right thing in his own way. And I just thought this was a little piece of that.
And just on a real personal level, Mark, I've gotten to know you a little bit, and I've just always enjoyed talking to you. I really was so heartened to read about your 75-year-old podcaster, a woman named Milda Berzani, I think,
Berzina, yeah.
Berzina.
Yeah.
As an older podcaster myself, I just felt like, boy, there's a connection right there,
Uh-huh.
and I know our audience is going to love that too. What was it about Milda that really kind of made her an important part of the story?
As I was figuring out what this story was going to be about, I got this idea. I was fascinated with the Cold War, and again, in the 80s, I was very interested in the Soviet Union and what was going on there. And I thought, well, what if when Court is trying to get from the West into the East, back into Russia, he ends up making contact with some people who were doing that, but maybe people who were doing it in the Soviet Union days. So he finds this woman in Latvia who was a resistance, sort of a subversive or a partisan or whatever you want to call it, Latvian who in the 1980s helped Western intelligence get people into and out of the Soviet Union. And I thought, well, that'd be interesting if there's like this old defunct network of
Yeah.
older Europeans who are doing this. And so I had Court hook up with them, and Milda is like his first point of contact, and she helps him get into Russia. And then once he's there, he stays on this rat line to some degree for a while, all the way into Moscow, and then he makes contact with a group of young modern day resistance fighters. So it's almost everything that's old is new again, and all these people from the 80s that were doing this job, there's younger people doing it now against fighting against Putin.
One of my other favorite characters is Zach Hightower. He plays a big part in the story too. At one point, Zach says of Court, Court has a big heart. We've come to know Court well, and he is very human. He also is. he's very interested in the frailties of others, and Milda is somebody that he really kind of makes sure to kind of guard. And so what other things about Court are you showing us now over some time that we're learning, particularly about his human side, these frailties that he possesses and observes in others?
Yeah, his human side is a vulnerability in his line of work, which makes it really interesting for me to write about it. And also, I think it builds his character in other ways to where he's really somebody you can root for. Um, he's an assassin. He kills people, sometimes without much in the way of mercy. He always feels justified in doing so. But he's also somebody that, he's a sheepdog protecting sheep or considers himself as such. And there's a point in the story where he is so single-minded of purpose of getting into Russia and getting Zoya out of Russia that he says, nothing else matters, absolutely nothing else matters. And then he realizes that something he's done has imperiled this 75-year-old Latvian woman. And he realizes he can't just turn and walk away from that. It's gone from nothing else matters to, well, actually, I got to fix this situation before I get back to what I was going to do. And I think that's something I think about sometimes when I'm reading either real events, historical events, or reading fiction. The uh, the fact it's like the character of the person matters so much that regardless of what they've set out to do, they have to do it in a way that they're going to be able to sleep at night afterwards.
I've also noticed in your books recently a reference to a phrase "Slava Ukraini," glory to Ukraine, and in addition to the dedication, I always take note of some of those things that you share with us as readers, and I know that tensions are really high right now with Russia, yet you tackle some of these very difficult subjects going on in the real world. This is a theme now for you, the Ukrainian kind of resistance, and you just do such a nice job with it. What did you learn particularly about the resistance that kind of opened up your eyes on an ongoing basis? Because I know this has continued.
Yes, 2 books ago, I did a Gray Man novel called Burner, which was very much about this. It didn't take place in Ukraine. This book mostly doesn't take place in Ukraine either, but it had the backdrop of the war. And there's so much going on. Russia is doing so many what we in the West call destabilizing actions or malicious actions in the West. The Russians consider it war. They're at war with us. We're just not willing to say that we're at war with them. And that's growing so much. As I was doing research and learning about that, I was just realizing that, you know, as Russia would say, or people in Russia would say, Ukraine is just one battleground in this larger war with the West. And Russia has the fourth largest army in the world, perhaps the most aggressive army in the world in the past 20 years. And Ukraine has the sixth largest army in the world. And if we let Ukraine fall to Russia, then Russia will absorb that and will absorb all the rare earth minerals and all the technology, plus the land mass. And then they will have borders with other countries. They've already set their goals. They've set their sights on Moldova, and they've attempted to, control the elections in Bulgaria and Romania and other places. It's very much we're very much at a tipping point here, with Russia, and Ukraine to me is sort of our stalwart front line of defense. The United States is spending the equivalent of 5% of our annual military budget, and completely, holding back our number one geopolitical foe with zero loss of American lives. And I think this is very much a tipping point. I think we're going to go into negotiations with the Russians. I think we've already given the Russians, um, you know, more than we should. There's tens of thousands of war crimes, documented war crimes that I'm sure they're going to try and get forgiven, and they're going to try and get all the money they're holding back. So, it's just I'm very passionate about this whole thing. And I don't want the book to be preachy. The book is about individuals who are in this predicament, but they're in this predicament in this real geopolitical backdrop. So I do research on this for hours every day, and so it's enjoyable when I'm able to create some fiction out of it.
Yeah. props to you for because it's enjoyable to me too. I always learn so much when I read your books and never preachy. And I know our audience is going to just benefit so much from just all the work and all the effort behind Mark Graney's new book, Midnight Black. Mark, I just have a couple more questions for you because I know you're very busy this time of year. But I wonder, in kind of this big area of research that you focus on so much, you ever come across something that you just kind of think, that's just too far out there. I mean, I can't quite, it's a bridge too far to get to that. I'm just going to leave that to everybody's imagination. Or do you just really just embrace anything that's going on out there, whether it's DARPA or crazy AI or, because really the book comes together so well around the technology side of things. But is there anything that you find that you can't take that on?
Well, probably. Tom Clancy had this really famous quote. The difference between fiction and reality is that fiction has to make sense. And I
Mhm.
always think about that, as you do research. This world is so like full of variables, and the people that oversimplify things in reality or in their understanding of the world are dangerous to me because I think there's so much nuance in the world. So when I'm researching something, of course I see stuff. I'm like, I can't go into that. I have to weed that out. In this book specifically, I kind of improved the resistance to the Kremlin within inside of Russia. So like the Russian resistance exists in different forms, but a lot of times they're sort of ideologically compromised, which might be a way to say anti-Semitic, depending on one group or one thing or another. So as I was doing research into this, I was going like, I'm not going to full-throated use the name of this actual rebel group and say they are the heroes, because it's bigger than that and it's more complicated than that. And I can't pretend to understand things to that level. I even have a character who's very much like Alexei Navalny in the book.
Mhm.
Um, and I didn't make him exactly like Alexei Navalny because
Mhm.
Navalny's got some, skeletons in his closet. We all do.
Mhm.
But that can really be pumped up or played up by anyone who's against him, and especially, if you have troll farms working for you like the Russians do. So I kind of wanted to create a little more idealized group. So there are things that I've come across. Now I've never come across something at DARPA like the aliens did land at Area 51, and I have the details and decided not to put them. I've never done anything like that. I've definitely kind of gotten too close to some things in intelligence matters or military matters where I've been interviewing someone in the government and asked them a question and they're like, yeah, no, we can't talk about that at all or whatever,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
definitely happens, which makes me think, well, I'm probably close
Yeah.
to something,
Getting
but
warmer.
I have no need to write about something like that. So I guess I definitely do keep my powder dry on some issues, but but it's nothing super sexy that I'm holding back.
Last question for you. Now 14 books, of the Gray Man and Court, and we've gotten to know him pretty well. Through that journey, is there anything that's surprised you about Court that's come out kind of, from your working with him and you're kind of letting him just kind of breathe?
Yeah, very much so. A few books ago, I decided I wrote a book called Sierra Six, and
Yeah.
I decided I would show him as a younger man, even before the events of the Gray Man. So like really bouncing back a decade or 12 years or something in time. And I had no intention to do that. I never had intentions of this becoming a series. I was just trying to become a published author. That's really all I wanted. And then after, the book was acquired and it was getting close to coming out, my editor was like, "Would you like to write two more? Well, we'd like to make an offer for two more." I was like, "Oh, okay. How does this work?" So I never had these grand scheme or anything, but the deeper you get into a series like this, if you want to keep it fresh and interesting and keep that longer story arc for those that have read the whole series, to keep that interesting, you have to sort of develop different things. And so in Sierra 6, I was like, all right, I'll write him as a younger man. And then I gave him this relationship. Um, and that relationship sort of showed why he is the way he is today. And I didn't know that was going to happen. Even I was even writing the book, and I was like, oh, what if she becomes a love interest? And then as deeper it got into it, it's like, well, some of the issues that you see Court have in the early books, maybe there's a reason for them, and maybe the reason is X, Y, and Z, the things that I'll write in this book. So that was actually fun to do, and I want to do more of that where we go back in time. I'm writing Gray Man 15 right now, and it involves Court's father and it involves Zach's daughter, and it has a lot of like the roots of this have really just expanded and expanded as the series has gotten bigger. I never planned of that. I would have told you the book was about a guy with, no face and no name who, slinks into town, does the job and slinks out. And now we have this kind of sort of rich world that is developing out of it. And that was not my plan, but it's enjoyable to work on.
Well, it is enjoyable to read these books too. Of course, our guest is author Mark Graney, New York Times best-selling author of the Gray Man series. The new book is Midnight Black. It's out on the 18th. Mark, thanks. I always appreciate you stopping by. I love talking to you. I just love the books. I could gush, forever about these, but I know you're very busy, and I so appreciate the generous time that you always give us. And love the books. Congrats on everything that you're doing, Mark, and what a great career you're having. What a success story. My best to you always, and please come back and talk to us again about Court and Zoya and Zach and all those wonderful characters. But thanks for your time today, Mark.
I appreciate it, Paul. It's always fun to come to talk to you.
Yeah, I love it.